to the first meeting in this municipal year of the Standards and General Purposes Committee. And I think that we have a number of new members on the committee, although we're probably the last in the cycle of first meetings now, but I think it still would be useful to introduce ourselves. And also we have one or two officers and our external auditor here, just so that we can put faces to names. My name's Councillor Mike Brunt. I am the chair. As I mentioned, it's my first time on audit and general as standards and general purposes. But if we could go around the room and perhaps start on this side here and then work at the back and then we get to the front here.
Okay, good evening. I'm John Oliver from West Barnes, and I'm the Vice Chair.
Hi everyone, I'm Robert Page, Councillor for West Barnes.
Hello, I'm Victoria Wilson, Councillor for Rains Park.
Hello, I'm John Braithwaite, Councillor for Abbey.
Hello, I'm Caroline Cooper-Marbia, Councillor for Collieswood Ward.
Hi, I'm Billy Hayes, Councillor for Graveney Ward.
I'm Martin Welton, Councillor for Pollard Hill Ward.
Alan Breet is Councillor at Ravensbury.
Brenda Fraser, Councillor for Long Thornton Ward.
Edith Macaulay, Councillor for Lavender Fields Ward.
I'm Karen Holland. I'm the Director of Corporate Services.
Hello, and I'm Louise Round. I'm the Council's Monitoring Officer.
I'm Margaret Cullerton, the Head of Internal Audit.
Helen Martin, Deputy Chief Accountant.
Martin Hone, I'm the Interim Chief Accountant.
Good evening, I'm Elizabeth Jackson, the Audit Partner from Ernst & Young, your External Auditor.
We have two online. I don't know if they are able to speak with us, but we have two independent members. Oh, we do.
Clive Douglas, independent member. There we are.
Thank you. Do you have the other? Okay. Right. Katie, are you online?
I am online. Hello. I'm not sure if you can hear me, but yes, hello. Good evening. I'm Katie Willis and I'm the second independent member.
Thank you very much. So that I think we have a complete set, apart from Michael Patterson, who's not here, but maybe joining us, who's also a member. Thank you very much for those introductions. Just to also clarify the list of membership, the paper that went to the annual council meeting is correct, and the list here is slightly incorrect because Councillor Cooper, Marbier and Councillor Macaulay are both full members. They're not substitutes of this committee. So we have a full attendance of all the councillors bar one, and the two independents are online. So thank you very much for that. Now, this is always a bit odd when there's a new chair to a committee, but we have the minutes before us of the last meeting, which was on the date of that? 10th of March. If there is anyone here who was on the 10th of March meeting, but we have to formally agree those minutes. Are they agreed as an accurate record? And Councillor? Right, that's good. So we have some inside knowledge there. If it's the committee's wish, then I will sign the minutes. Right, thank you. Leave those there. So moving on then with the agenda, we've got
item 2, Chair.
Oh, yes, thank you. Item 2. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? None. Thank you for pointing that out. Item 2. Now we're on to item 4. Before we have item 4, I was going to ask Caroline Holland to just talk us through, as there are many new members to this, and we may have a discussion at the end of the meeting about any training needs we have. But I think this will be a good point just to set the tone for today's meeting, so we understand what the report, the shape of the reports, and the purpose of the reports that we have before us tonight, both external audit reports, our governance statement, and our internal audit report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this committee receives a number of regular reports as well as some ad hoc reports. So the regular reports, as you'll have seen, we've got the external auditor here, and we like to get our value for money from her because sort of she brings an annual plan, the audit of accounts for both our general fund accounts and also our pension fund accounts, a fee letter, and then an overall annual letter. So she's here tonight to present the annual report for the year ended 2021. And that links quite nicely then with regular updates from our internal audit function, which is run at a shared service base partnership with Richmond, Wandsworth, Sutton, Kingston, and ourselves. So some really good work being done there, and also some synergies and learnings from across the audits that have been done. So internal and external audit work quite closely together, and external audit can replace reliance on some of the work that our internal audit work colleagues do, but they will do some testing to make sure that they can place that reliance on them, that they're confident in that work. And so far we are confident that they can do so, but we do bring a regular update as to our opinion of the work that is done. You will see also that the external auditor and the internal auditor, I certainly meet with the external auditor on a regular basis. She will also meet with the internal auditor and the resources team, and we have a quarterly meeting with myself and the chief exec just to raise any issues both ways. So we can raise issues with her or alert her to things that may be coming up, and she can also raise issues of concern or just issues that may be sort of coming up in other boroughs. So you will see as part of the plan that there is some work being done on the overall accounts, and we have been very fortunate in that we have had our 2021 accounts signed off. There are still 201 authorities that have not had their accounts signed off for last year. So that is partly due to an issue that arose quite late on around how you value your infrastructure assets, but also some capacity issues with regards to the firms and being able to complete the works, as well as some authorities struggling to complete the work as well. But I think that's been really useful to be able to demonstrate, hopefully to you, that we like to maintain a tight ship, work very closely with the external auditors to plan the work so that we're ready for when they're able to come in and do that work. So certainly they are planning to come back in November with our audited accounts, subject to that infrastructure issue being addressed, fingers crossed. We, as was mentioned as part of the introductions, we have two independent members that sit on this panel and working closely with the monitoring officer if there are issues around any complaints that need to be undertaken. Not all complaints will progress to that stage, but the independent people are appointed for a period of 3 years, a term of 3 years, and that can be extended once for a further 3 years. So certainly our current independent person was Clive Douglas, was extended at the last meeting in November, so he is serving a further 3-year term. Any changes to the constitution comes here for sign off and approval before going on to full council. Any update on polling stations and polling places in regards to the elections, because it's an admin function and not an executive function, so it will come to this committee for some work. And I know Councillor Welton has had some extensive knowledge and experience of looking at the polling places and where they're held, and making sure they're suitable venues for us to hold those in. We will also bring annual gifts and hospitality report for both members and for officers. So again, that's something we're very keen to be transparent and open about, as well as the annual complaints report. There may be sort of an issue with timings on that, but we certainly hope to bring you that one on a regular basis as well. We bring an update on our risk management, so the overall strategy and register will go to Cabinet, but then we also bring an update to you for consideration and review to here as well. And if you look at the work programme, it says update on RIP authorizations. So that's the Regulatory Investigation Powers Act, where if we need to do covert surveillance, we have to get formal authority and approval from magistrates to be able to do that. We will bring that information to you to show what we're doing. And we have made limited use of it, but certainly in some areas previously there may have been some covert filming to try and get some fly tippers, but we have not used it for a period of time, but we certainly bring a regular update to you to be able to show that for you. And then clearly an area that of concern had previously been highlighted was the use of our temporary and contract staff. So we have a number of agencies and interims who are paid over £30 an hour. So we bring that information to you. You're able to ask directors what they're doing to address the situation, what restructures, but also there are some difficulties, particularly in recruiting, and we have a shared legal service, and Louise will demonstrate quite clearly and often the struggles in trying to recruit permanent staff into that service, and there are times we are struggling to recruit interims because some areas of work there is a very healthy private sector competing for those same resources. So we are trying to maximise areas where we can use the apprenticeship levy and grow our own, but that still takes time to be able to do so, and it doesn't stop other authorities poaching our staff as well. We also have a review of members' interests can come on an ad hoc basis, as well as if there's been any maladministration. So if a complaint progresses past our stage 2 process onto the local government ombudsman, and they have found that we are at fault, and they say that we also may have to make a payment exceeding £1,000, that will need to come to this committee as well, and will demonstrate the actions that we have taken and the redress that we have put in place as well. So changes of the constitution will include revisions to contract standing orders. So we have to bring now regular updates. I'll say this word once, now that we are have done Brexit, so there will be changes to the legislation required around procurement rules. So we will be bringing further updates there. And clearly, as required, you will see that there's a report tonight on the agenda for the Freedom of the Borough recommendations. So they also come here. So hopefully that gives you a snapshot of some of quite the different things that can be involved, and for you to sort of ask questions about as well. But happy to take any questions, Chair.
Anyone have any questions? Councillor Hayes.
Yeah, thanks for that report. When you said assets before, about valuing assets, is that delineated, is that separated from buildings assets and land assets? Is there two distinct things? And is there any kind of chart to show councils, you know, what that breakdown is in particular councils? But so is there a separation of building assets and land as an asset? Thanks.
So yes, in our accounts, we do separate out land, buildings, and then we have what we call infrastructure and other assets as well. So for example, the ceremonial chain for the mayor is another type of asset that we have as well. So the assets that I'm referring to that we have particular issues, all authorities are having particular issues with, is sort of roads and things like that. But we have previously had issues valuing our schools, for example, with the land and use of buildings where it's quite difficult there for a particular use. If there was another use for them, what is the value of that? So we've had some ongoing discussions with the auditor and also with the property management team in the Environment and Regeneration Department around how we value those particular type of assets.
Thanks. And is that standard accounting practice to separate land and? Thank you.
So I think that at the end we may either brainstorm a series of topics that we'd like covered in training, or that may become apparent from some of the questions that are asked during the meeting. Or maybe we're all trained fully and very happy, but let's see. One of the things that we often have to bring to panels like this or committees like this is to set aside our professional knowledge because it doesn't always apply in the same way in a council setting as it would do outside, either as trained accountants or HR or whatever that might be. We need to take the advice of officers and any training on that. So thank you. Well, I think that leads us usefully on to the point where we start with asking Elizabeth Jackson to give a report. And as I just introduced myself to Elizabeth before the meeting, I go back a long way in terms of my first job was with the forerunner company or partnership of Ernst & Young. It was called Winnie Murray back in those days. And then it became Winnie Murray, Ernst & Ernst, and then Winnie Murray, Ernst & Ernst, Turkins, Barton and Mayhew, and then Ernst & Winnie, and then eventually EY, Ernst & Young. So that's a whistle-stop tour of my early career, which I left behind. And here I am. So Elizabeth, would you like to introduce the report?
Brilliant. Thank you. And that was very interesting because I did not know that about my own organisation, which probably means I should learn more about my history. So obviously, good evening. I obviously introduced myself. I'm Elizabeth Jackson as the EY partner for your external audit. Last year was my first year working with the council, but as the Director of Services said, actually we've kind of built a good working relationship, and actually it's been very fruitful in kind of getting to where we needed to get to. I think we were very lucky with 2021 with the infrastructure. I think we signed about 2 weeks before it was issued as a halt, stop, don't do any more work until we've resolved this issue, which is not yet resolved. So I think we were incredibly lucky. There are a lot of frustrated people around London and elsewhere in the country for that very reason. So just as a kind of a bit of a background, my responsibility is to issue your audit report. So it's my name that you'll see on the bottom of your, what we call an audit opinion. If you kind of know that, we now call it an audit report, which seems to kind of confuse people, but effectively it's the same document and it's my name on the bottom of it. So I'm the one signing to say, yes, your accounts are true and fair. They are materially representative of what my knowledge is of the council and the records that we've inspected. And also then we issue a value for money as part of that to say that actually in 3 certain areas that we look at, there are no weaknesses in the arrangements in place to do it. So we don't comment on the decisions that you make unless they're particularly poor, and there is clear evidence of them being very poor. So we would look at the arrangements and the governance that's in place to make that decision. It's not, have you spent the money correctly? It's actually, what have you done to underpin that spending of that money? So we're starting tonight with looking back, and I know there are a lot of new faces because many of you are unknown to me, so I apologise for that. This is a summary of all the work we undertook for the 2021 financial year around the value for money and around the financial statements. And I think probably just the headline messages are, you'll be pleased to know, as it is a very long report that has all been reported elsewhere previously to kind of the old committee, shall we say. We issued an unqualified audit report in February 2022. So there were no issues arising that led me to have to modify that audit report to say that there was something wrong at the council. And also there are a number of powers in my kind of, I'm allowed to do separate reporting and raise issues and concerns. And I didn't have to do that in any circumstances for 2021. All of those powers that I have to assess and conclude whether kind of legally you've done things you need to do and all the like, and do I need to report to anyone else on issues arising at Merton, and there were no such issues, which is probably the best you can be for both the council and the pension fund. So I think that's probably like the clean bill of health from the 2021. That's not to say we didn't have many a robust discussion, and there are amendments in this document of the findings from that audit. I won't take you through them in the fact that they're kind of done and dusted to a certain extent, but I am happy to answer any questions really as we go through. Probably one final thing to say is I have to certify that the audit year is closed, and that's when we've completed all work. We're not yet able to do that, so the audit year is still open to a certain extent in the fact that we have to do something called a whole of government's accounts return, and that's where all local authority accounts get added together in a massive spreadsheet, and then they are all submitted, and then they make the government accounts for local government. That guidance for 2021 has not yet been issued. Therefore, you can't prepare the return that you need to prepare, and we can't do that audit. We have been told it is coming in the summer, so we are not yet sure what that means or when that means, because we've been promised it for quite a while already, but that will obviously be something that we will have to audit and look at, and then I will be able to certify the year. It's and I'm sure finance will potentially disagree, but it should be relatively straightforward because you have an audited set of accounts, and therefore it should just be plugging in the numbers that we've all agreed into a spreadsheet, us ticking it back to my audited accounts and moving on. Whereas often you have to prepare them on draft sets of accounts, then we audit, then you have to amend that, and it's lots of extra work. So hopefully we're proposing that it should be a streamlined approach for this year. And then only to say, I don't really want to end on this, but I'm going to, the final fees. So the fees are always the contentious issue, and it's always one that excites members hugely, and quite rightly so, because it is council money and pension fund money that you are spending on your external audit fee. The fees, something called a scale fee. So Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited, we call PSAA Limited, is shorthand throughout this document. They set something called a scale fee a number of years ago, and that is deemed the appropriate fee for the council. EY have reassessed the work that we do under all the regulatory standards. There have been increased focus, people have seen reports out in the media this week. There's increased focus from a regulatory perspective. We struggle to retain talent, which is across the whole audit kind of sector. It's not just in my public sector team, it is across all firms and all sectors. So we need to pay a certain level, and we want to invest in those people to ensure that we produce high quality audits for you. And when I issue the unqualified audit report, you can be satisfied that we've done a robust audit to get there. So for those fees, they were £110,000 for the council and £16,000 for the pension fund. And then PSAA, in the report, we've just got that we've submitted audit fees to PSAA Limited. They have now determined those additional audit fees. And they are now, so the final audit fee for the council was £192,000. And then the final fee for the pension fund was £29,000. So that is a huge increase, obviously, from the scale fee. It wasn't as much as we requested, and obviously the fee that we did request is in this public report. And obviously you'll see that both of those fees were much higher from the actual work that we already undertook. But PSAA act as an arbitrator on behalf of us and the council to determine what is appropriate for the work. And they have deemed those final fees to be the appropriate, and we've invoiced that for payment by the council. And really just answer any questions.
Final fee figure you just quoted, the 192,000, this is on page 38, 39 of the report for the pension fund on 39. But that was the fee for 2019-20.
No, sorry. The final fees are the final fee for 1920, that's agreed. The final fee in the 2021 column on page 38, and then obviously the following page for the pension fund, we originally put in here that it was 269,991. PSAA determined that we were not entitled to that full amount, and they determined that the final fee for the 2021 year was £192,000.
Yeah. Oh, so that fixed at the same rate as the one before?
Pretty much, yes.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to clear that anomaly in my mind.
Yes.
Misheard maybe the first time round. Okay. Thank you very much for that report. Are there any questions? Yes.
Yeah, I had one question for the sort of external auditor and one sort of for our internal auditors. For the external auditor, it's more of a comment. In the value for money section, you sort of describe the controls. Do you offer, I know there's not really an opinion on whether those controls are sort of best practice or whether they're operating in practice. Is that something that you're able to cover in future years or able to express an opinion on?
Through you, Chair. So the value for money more looks at the arrangements than the controls per se in place. Internal audit, and I'm sure Margaret will fill you in greater detail, but internal audit kind of look at the controls that are in operation at the council. And although we do look at the control environment, that's around the controls in place to produce the financial statements. So are your systems working as we expect, but at a very high level, whereas internal audit would do what I kind of call a deep dive. They'll come in and do like a extended piece of work, testing everything around that the controls in that system, whereas we look at it from a relatively high level to say, actually, is your system working from a material perspective? Will it produce the accounts? Will we get the figures out of it as we need? And on the value for money arrangements, we do look at controls, but that's more around kind of the arrangements that are in place for making, as I said earlier, those decisions and spending that money. So where you've got levels, say, for expenditure, and it has approval levels, we check things like that to say, actually, are you compliant with your own kind of standard financial instructions, your standing orders? Is that being followed when you're making those major decisions? Or are you procuring things because a service has decided that's what they'd like to procure, but then they're not following the procurement strategy and the procurement process? So I think that, hopefully, if that answers your question, that's the kind of focus we have.
But you don't express an opinion on, say, whether Merton's sort of processes are, best in class, mediocre, or you don't do that?
No, we don't say that. We can do some form of analysis if that was needed, but that is outside of the scope of what I'm kind of required to do. So from the value for money perspective, we would say if you didn't have a control environment in place, and I was concerned that actually your arrangements weren't robust and weren't working, that's when I'd kind of flag that to you. But I wouldn't say Merton is best in class for this, and actually from what we've seen against all our other, say, London boroughs as comparison, Merton's doing this best. Because I think we probably like to hedge our bets. We always use kind of words like satisfactory and adequate, and we don't ever say this is best. I think if you were doing something particularly remarkable, then we would comment on it in the value for money. But I think that's always a point in time, and therefore situations evolve. So what could be best one week, I could then report to you in a report 6 weeks later when it's then public, and actually it could not be best in class anymore. Well, I'm sure that's not the case in Merton, but just as an example.
An additional question, Chair, if that's okay. And that was sort of to our own sort of chief accountants. In the external audit report, it flags that there's sort of unreconciled differences in both council tax and NNDR debtors, and makes a recommendation these should be fully reconciled. Has that reconciliation taken place, and are those accounts now fully reconciled?
Yes, that reconciliation has taken place, and we're able to explain the figures.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about the misstatements that have not been corrected by management. So maybe a comment from you, maybe a comment then from the management, but it seems a bit strange if you've identified an error that it would not be corrected.
If I take this first, then I can kind of hand to finance, if that's right. I have to issue your audit report in with a material, so it has to be materially correct, and we set that level on your gross revenue expenditure, and that is set at 1.8% of your total gross revenue expenditure for the year for Merton Council. Any errors individually or in aggregate below that level, the council can choose to keep as unadjusted. I then have to report those to you in the audit results report, and then obviously summarised in the auditor's annual report at year end, to say these errors have occurred in the accounts. Management has chosen not to correct them. Do you support that? There's something called a letter of representation that, as part of my audit report, before I issue it, once you've approved those financial statements in November, I will then ask you to sign a letter of representation, and those errors are set out in that letter to say that actually you, and through the chair, the chair is comfortable that they're not corrected, because actually they're not leading to a material misstatement in the accounts. The value of both of these and the nature of those adjustments meant I was comfortable that you could leave them as unadjusted for 2021, and I could still issue my clean audit opinion, so therefore it could be unqualified. I think the difficulty arises is when they're larger. And then obviously we do get into discussions. I have had that organisations where they won't amend and it is material, and then you have to go down a qualification route, so which is a very serious situation for any set of accounts. And I think management have their own reasons as to why they don't need to adjust. And I think often it's because it doesn't hit, I call it the bottom line, which is bad kind of terminology for new people, but effectively it doesn't hit your outturn position. So what you're telling the members of the public is your expenditure and your kind of outturn position, that's your budget for the year. And this is where you've your year-end reporting. As long as it doesn't hit that revenue, then we're generally quite comfortable that you don't amend the accounts. Both of these were quite technical areas of the accounts, and therefore there could be risk in amending certain things, because actually then you could make an error in making that amendment and actually it can end up worse. And the second one was obviously around valuation. That is a estimate. We do lots, and I'll talk to you later about in the audit plan, where we have estimates in the accounts. It's always a judgment. So I have a specialist, particularly on the property, plant and equipment. I'm not a valuer. I'm not a valuation specialist. So I have a team that does all that work for me. You obviously have your own property team, your own valuers, you get external valuers as well when you need that additional support. There will always be differences in our judgments and opinions, and often it's agree to disagree in some of those valuation bases. And as long, again, that we're within that material level, then I'm satisfied. If the materiality is roughly £10 million, if you then had, say, an error that's 12 million, I would be qualifying your accounts if you didn't amend it. This one was, I think, 3.2 million on the PPE. Therefore, I was quite comfortable. It's well below that 10 million. I could then be satisfied that you have a clean set of accounts.
Yeah, I was just going to say. Sorry, I don't know. Just to be absolutely clear, and I think Liz has said it already. We're not talking about cold hard cash. There isn't a 3.2 million black hole in the accounts. It's just a question of interpretation in terms of the overall financial position of the council and our cash management. That's actually on the ball. This is just a question of, as you said, questions of where do we allocate funds? Where do we, what boxes do we put them in? But I wouldn't want members of the committee to go away with the impression that somehow we're relaxed about a 3.2 million gap. That isn't the case whatsoever. Okay, thanks.
Right, and obviously, as I'm new, on page 38, I was looking at note 1 on that section, where the regulatory and compliance audit requirements, and there was an understanding that additional work was undertaken in the sum of 117,298. And obviously, you expect for this to happen, obviously in future years. Is this something that happens all the time? I just needed, because I'm new, I just needed clarification whether this is something that happens all the time, year by year.
Yes, note 1 is the planned recurrent fee variation, and that is reflecting what Ernst & Young believe is the real true cost of delivering your audit. The £110,000 is the fee that is set by PSCA Limited as the scale fee. We have then recalculated that based on the work and the historic cost of delivering your audit, and we believe that is £109,000 extra. So therefore, we think our base fee for just kind of turning up and doing the accounts with the risk profile that is expected is £219,000. PSCA, as you'll see, in 1920 disagreed with that and then issued 39, or issued to us to ask the council to pay £39,000 against that. This year, again, obviously, I said for the 2021, we obviously requested £270,000 as the audit fee, and we were given 192 in total.
To add to that.
So I suppose if I could just confirm that this is also a situation which applies to many other boroughs, and that's part of the issue that the PSA is trying to address within the new contracts that are going to be let. But to give you some assurance, Councillor, the audit scale fee, say for 2021 nationally, was 28.3 million, and there was a further 7.2 million added to the cost of those works. So it just shows you the scale of what's looking at. And of course, not all of those audits are finished. So there is likely to be an additional cost associated with that as well. So it is something that we're challenging as to how we do it, because contracts were let and it's then sort of the work can't be done for the price of the contract. So how do we manage that? But also how do we learn going forward with the new contracts that we're waiting to hear about?
So Chair, are we also asking question about internal audits or? Okay, that's fine then.
Are there any more questions on relation to item, the item number right? Item 4, the external audit report for 2020-21.
Thank you. Sorry, me again. Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
So yeah, this is our audit plan for 21-22.
Oh, sorry, do we need to note the item? Right, okay. In that case, please go ahead.
Thank you,
5,
Chair.
yes.
Yeah, so this is our audit plan for 21-22. So this is kind of starting the audit. And this is, we've done some initial planning work, some what we call the scope and strategy phase. And then this is the audit plan setting out the risks arising for the financial statements audit that the council's currently preparing and is due for publication by the end of this month. And then our audit of those accounts is planned for September, October, and then into early November for hopefully meeting the deadline set for all local government audits to be signed off of the 30th of November 2022. I say hopefully because there are always issues arising, and any members who kind of keen from last year obviously noted that instead of signing in September or November, we did sign in February. And the only issue arising this year, we've already started our property, plant and equipment work, which I will talk a bit more about later, which was the sticking point last year and led to delay audit opinion. I feel it will be infrastructure assets. We are still waiting for guidance from CIPFA, who is the kind of accounting body that underpins the financial statements of all public sector organisations in local government. They are currently drafting some guidance around this situation. It's a multi-material figure that's in your accounts. It's in all kind of large London boroughs, the county councils, and even some districts also have these infrastructure assets. So I think probably just caveating before anyone picks me up in November audit committee to say, why aren't you signing EY? It's because of that situation that might derail, and depending on where we land as a whole sector as to what we do. So just to quickly take you through the risks, I won't take you through the entire report, but to kind of just set a bit of a scene. We set out, we have 3 different kind of risk categories, if you like, for the financial statements audit. And they are something called fraud risks. And then we have significant risks, and then we have something called inherent risks. And we love lots of terminology in audit and probably the accounts as well. So please do bear with me. So fraud risks, there are 2 mandatory fraud risks under the International Standards of Auditing, and these apply to regardless of the sector. So to the public sector, the charity sector, and also all corporate organisations have to be audited using the International Standards of Auditing. They're kind of my guiding principles of what I need to do and how. The fraud international standard on auditing sets out 2 risks, and these are misstatements due to fraud and error, and that is where the management override of controls is effectively what we say, and that is that management, so kind of the directors level within your organisation, have the ability to override that control environment that's in place in this organisation through just being senior in their kind of role and responsibilities. The second area is around revenue recognition, and that's far more of a kind of a corporate sector risk in around that it actually is recognising your revenue in the wrong accounting period. We've identified that management override occurs in all organisations, and therefore that is a fraud risk. I'm not saying I suspect any of your senior finance officers or anyone else in this council to be perpetrating fraud, but it is just a risk that we have to do, and we plan additional special procedures in all organisations to mitigate that risk. And then the second risk is obviously around revenue recognition, and that's just where you could be manipulating your revenue. For the 21-22 year, we've kind of split that into 2 areas. One is around the capitalisation of revenue expenditure, and that's where you use your revenue to then spend as capital incorrectly. And we do specific testing around your property, plant and equipment, your additions that you're adding to your kind of fixed asset register to say that that money is fairly spent as capital and you're not misreporting any income. And the second one is around COVID-19 grants. And although we have obviously we're living in a different world from we were 2 years ago. You're still receiving some form of COVID-19 grant kind of funding. You're still spending that. And obviously that is open to manipulation from not only your officers, but obviously people claiming it. And there's certain rules about how that's accounted for in different sections of the accounts, depending on whether you're acting in different ways. So that's one of the risks that we see, that could be a misstatement in your accounts because of the material figure that it is. And then we move on to the significant risks. And there's one significant risk, and we've talked about it already tonight, but it's the valuation of your land and buildings. And we use terminology here, which are two different ways of valuing assets. And that is under depreciated replacement cost, and then the fair value, the existing use value. I won't get into the detail because I'm sure I'll end up, A, will be bored, and B, I'll probably get something wrong. But effectively, there are two different ways that you value your assets. We do a lot of testing. You obviously use your valuer. I use my external specialist as well, who is a valuer, a RICS qualified valuer, to give me assurance over those, because they are hugely material balances in your accounts. They're kind of the biggest kind of area on your balance sheet. And that's a significant risk because obviously from the previous report, there were a number of errors in last year. We recommended a number of recommendations around that, the PPE evaluation process to be implemented for 21-22 to kind of improve some of that area. I have my specialist already looking at it. They have done we've got an internal meeting tomorrow with the valuations team to say what is his initial findings, what is his questions, so we can pose them back to the council. So then it's well in advance of our audit starting in September to give the council and your valuer time to reflect and look at that, so we're not delayed like we were last year. Yep. And then we have 3 inherent risks, which are lower level risks, but we still think they're more important than just a general accounts balance. And therefore we want to do some additional specific procedures in them. And that is around your national non-domestic rates appeals provision. And that's because it uses management judgment to determine the figure that's in the accounts. It's not an actual figure that's there. It is using the information that you have around the business rates. And then you make people that can appeal those business rates decisions, and you have to make a provision about whether or not you think you'll have to pay out on those appeals. So that's a lot of management judgment that management make, and that we then have to audit to say, do we think your judgment is reasonable? The next one is around going concern. And that is around, now we're less concerned, obviously, with COVID kind of moving around the stability of the finances of the council. There are obviously a lot of external pressures currently, and we met yesterday, as was said earlier, and we obviously talked around some of that, around the inflation, some of the cost pressures that are there. We look at all of that, not only from the value for money perspective, but actually me issuing to say that you are a going concern. Obviously, those who've been public sector for a long time know that you're never not going to be a council, or you're never not going to be providing the mandatory statutory services that you have to, but it's about, do you have the money underpinning that to actually be able to provide that without a bailout from government? I don't have any concerns, significant concerns in that nature. 2 years ago, going concern was pretty much a significant risk everywhere, whereas now we've reduced it down to be actually the disclosures in the accounts. And are you still doing that robust assessment that management do every year for us? And then the third inherent risk is the valuation of the defined benefit pension scheme. And that again is a hugely complex area of your accounts. I'm not going to pretend to be a specialist in pensions, and we use something called our actuarial team within EY called EY Pensions, and they are a set of actuaries that then assess what your actuaries produce for your financial statements, and then they review their actuary report and determine for me whether or not it's fairly stated. I then place reliance on that work, and then we can issue your audit report. And then the final risk obviously is the infrastructure. And then just to say, for our value for money work, we haven't yet done our detailed plan assessment of that. This audit plan sets out a few areas of focus just from our ongoing liaison with kind of council officers to say, these are the areas that you're focusing on as a council. So we'll do some kind of analysis and looking into how those either projects or the finances particularly are going, but we haven't yet identified any areas of risk of significant weakness for 21-22. But I will bring an update report to you or circulate outside of it if I think there's anything significant that needs to be raised to your attention urgently. And then the only thing I was going to say was around materiality and timeline. I think probably I covered that in the previous item in one of the responses, it's describing materiality, and then obviously the timeline will work into the end of November. And then I'll stop because I've talked a lot, and if there's any questions.
Is there anything from the finance team internally to add to that? Okay. Any questions, Councillor Hayes?
You just touched on it. It's back to the valuation issue. It's a separate valuation for land and property. And I don't understand accounting, but there used to be a thing called historical cost. What's the accounting method for judging value? Is it inflation, or is it, you know, like this historical cost, which you think building inflation or something like that? But what are the accounting methods for land and infrastructure? Thanks.
Sadly, we're not allowed to use historical cost because that would make the audit much quicker and simpler, and probably lots of our challenges and discussions and falling out, and much cheaper, yes, because the majority of your extra fee is related to assets. So we would all like historical costs, and please do lobby on that basis. So we're not allowed to use that. That is used heavily in corporate, so anyone who kind of works in the corporate sector, but they're still allowed to use that. So there are two areas: the depreciated replacement cost, and that's effectively what it costs for you to replace it. So if it burnt down, or if it got, I don't know, but effectively burnt down is usually the easiest example. If then you had to rebuild it tomorrow, what is the cost of rebuilding that building? And that's only allowed to be used for certain asset class and certain asset types. So for example, your schools, things like that, that actually you would need a new school, and therefore we would say that's not on an open market value, because you'd be unlikely to sell that school because you would need to replace it and still provide a school in that area, and therefore you can use depreciated replacement cost. That's often where we get into discussions and potential disagreements, because we think things should be at market value. You would like to hold them at depreciated replacement cost, and that's often one of the challenges. And then the other asset category, which is by far your kind of the majority of your assets, any investment property, if you had it, kind of all majority of your buildings are held at market value, which is we call fair value, or in here the existing use value. And that's where we use the valuation specialist to say, what is it worth as at the 31st of March 2022? And do we agree with that valuation? And you can use all different forms of kind of indices that are readily available. We jokingly use when you hold, you don't have a housing revenue account here, but if you had council houses, we then go and use things like Rightmove and Zoopla to then verify the costs of those houses and the valuation that are in your accounts. So there is readily market value available. And then your investment properties are usually then on that investment return. What income are you getting in the year? And then that is built in with lots of clever assumptions by kind of the specialists that both the council and I use.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your report. Just looking at the financial statement impact section, where you talked about in 2020-21, the significant changes were made in the carrying value of property, land, and equipment. And I was just wondering whether that has been corrected, or when was the adjustment made, if it was?
Yes, it does there. So in this, what is the risk section on the page 54 around the valuation of land and buildings? Yes, that amendment was made. Kind of talking earlier about the materiality and unadjusted misstatements, the total error was around about 55-ish million pound in last year's accounts. So yes, I could not have issued your audit opinion unless you corrected that error. So all of those amendments were made. I was satisfied with the final version of the accounts and therefore issued my audit report. We did a lot of extensive work. It was probably about 6 months of auditing around just the valuation of those PPE assets. So I was quite comfortable when we concluded that work that actually the accounts were materially fairly stated in the final version.
Thank you for that answer. I just wanted to clarify one thing, that is just reading the same bit that was just referred to. It's talking about at the end of 2018-19. So are you making sort of like a prior year adjustment there? And how come you didn't spot that then?
That's a great question. Yes, so it was 2018-19. So when we identified the error in the 2021 accounts, some of that accounting went back to 2018-19, and therefore we did do the council did, not me, the council did prepare a prior year adjustment. The accounts were restated on that basis, and the third balance sheet as such was done to back to it. We didn't identify it in the 2018-19 year. It was based on there was an extensive reworking of the PPE balance in 2017-18 accounts. And one of the areas looked at was around the schools, the value of the school's land. And as part of that, then it was used, the council's valuer and the council, and we did not identify it as an audit firm. We look at different things every year, and that was not an area of focus. The council then applied that logic for schools' land, which is allowed to be treated differently because it is land attached to a school, and they treated that as all of your assets held at depreciated replacement cost. All land was valued on that basis, which when we looked at it in detail in 2021, we then identified that error. So I think what we do is we usually focus on the assets held at fair value, so the existing use value assets, because they're the ones that are riskier to a certain extent. And in the intervening years in 2018 and 2019-20, we didn't do a detailed amount of work from using my EYE real estate specialist to actually give me that RICS qualified valuation. We did not do that work on DRC assets in 2018-19, and we did not look at that particular class. We looked at the schools to ensure that actually that was still being correctly done, and it was, but we didn't look at these type of assets.
Chair, can I just ask a follow-up question? Then I'll be quiet. So had you done that, you would have qualified the accounts in that year, would you?
Only if the council didn't make the amendment.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yes, question.
Yeah, and just a final one on the materiality threshold. What's the standard that informs that? You mentioned it's set 10 million. Is that a standard for councils, or where does that come from?
So all audit firms use slightly different materiality, but effectively we as Ernst & Young use your gross revenue expenditure, and depending on the sector, depending on what, so some for your pensions, we use assets for your net asset statement, because we say actually that's a better reflection than using your expenditure. In a pension fund, it wouldn't be as a sensible reflection. So for the council, because expenditure is your main area of what you're doing with your services and the provision, we think that's the most sensible. Any reader of these impenetrable accounts would actually be focused on the expenditure of the council. So for all audits, we set a benchmark between 0.5% and 2% for all councils. For what we call major local authorities, we cap that at 1.8%. So we say that then 1.8% of your expenditure is our overall planning materiality level. So that's the level at which in your accounts, I give my true and fair opinion and say there are no material misstatements, they're correct. I can have the ability to reduce that. So one of the areas because you're a major local authority, which basically means you spend over £500 million in a year, because you're a major local authority deemed by the PSAA Limited, I obviously reduce from that 2% to 1.8% as a standard area. I then look at the areas in your accounts last year and the errors that were made and say, is there anything in that I think could lead to further misstatement this year, and therefore I need to reduce it. We didn't have to at Merton, but one of my other councils last year, where they did have going concern issues in the prior year, I did then reduce that level to 1.5, because I said, actually, I think we need to do more detailed testing. Obviously, it increases sample sizes, increases the level of work we do. Obviously, with your PP valuation errors last year, I have taken that into account when setting the audit plan and the materiality levels. And I've determined that it is an area of specialism. And it is discrete in one area of the accounts. So it wasn't pervasive to the whole accounts. It was around the PPE balances. If you had, say you were you had a poor finance team and you had a set of accounts where, and we do see it, where you rewrite most notes, So kind of when you get the set of accounts from draft to final, pretty much everything has been amended in some guise from audit, then I would reduce that level and say, actually, I think the risk of you producing a high quality set of accounts is significantly reduced because I don't have faith in the finance team, and therefore then I reduce that level. And we have done that, bodies, and I have had a local government audit at 1% before because I didn't trust the quality of the finance team to do so. But for Merton, I'm quite satisfied. I'm sure I'll come back to you and say if something is wrong later on. I do reassess it as the audit goes on. And then obviously we have something called performance materiality on that slide, and that's the level at which we test over. So I then set that can be between either 50% or 75%. And again, I've deemed that your working papers are high quality, you have a stable finance team. The level of error in last year's accounts, considering the length of those accounts, was not significant. Therefore, I'm happy that I can actually have it at the upper threshold, that we can test any balance over the 75% of that materiality level. And that effectively means any balance in the accounts over 7.5 million does get audited by us, whether it's broken down and sample tested or whether it's just an individual balance. We then look at every figure in that accounts.
Thank you very much. I think that we've exhaustively gone through questions on that. So thank you for bearing with us on all the questions and answering them all. And not once having to say, you'll come back to us, which is really good. Thank you. So that's the items 4 and 5 covered now. 6, annual governance statement. Who's presenting on that? That's okay, Margaret, internal audit. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the report on the annual review of governance as required by the accounts and audit regulations. And it's required to be published with the annual accounts, so it supports the annual accounts. I just want to point out it's actually covering the years 21-22. So it will only go up to the end of March 22. So it's a very backward looking review on the governance arrangements in the council during that year. So any changes that have happened since March will be reflected in the next annual governance statement, because I just want to put that out, particularly as the elections have taken place. So if you notice that things are slightly different now. We follow the CITFA principles, so the 7 principles that set out, and we follow that framework, and below that there is sub-principles. So it's a very high level review of the arrangements in place in the council and how you make your decisions and how you sort of lead and control your functions in order to achieve the objectives of the council. There are key officers that are involved in pulling together the information for this report. As we've covered in the report, each of the principles are sort of highlighted in each area, and it's all more or less setting out how the council's meeting those requirements. Where we've identified actions, they're actually included on the report, and we've kept those to quite high level actions that the council are doing or need that we've identified for 22-23. As part of the review, we do pick up smaller things that need updating, like policies and that. So that's sort of helpful for us as officers to sort of keep those updated. The actions from last year's review are included on at the end of the report. So it gives you the 6 actions that were identified on the review for the previous year. So 3 of those are being carried forward into this year's actions, and 3 we've closed off. And then from this review, we've identified a further 3 actions, which you'll see on table 2, which I'm sure you're aware the ambition for the boroughs is one that's a key one for the council. The response to the climate emergency, and obviously there's quite a lot of social care changes this year, and some of those may have a significant impact on the council. Once we get some more, like on the care cap and things, the things that we're working towards in the council, so we sort of identified those as the higher risk actions. I think the only thing I forgot to say was as we do the assessment, we rely on a lot of assurances. So it's either internal audit work, inspectors that have come in, any internal reviews or consultants. We sort of rely on assurance works for each of those sections. If anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you for taking us through that. It's worth, maybe it's not a pecuniary interest, but as Chaz has mentioned in this section of the report, I'm about to become a director of Chaz, which is a non-remunerated position as part of council responsibility. So just note it in a minute. Are there any questions of Margaret?
Yeah, not really a question. Maybe it's something we can cover in the training bit at the end, but it's difficult for me, or possibly for us, to judge the sort of internal audit plan without sight of the corporate risk register, you know, for the borough, as then we can cross-check between, you know, what's been identified on the risk register versus the areas that are being audited, and then sort of on sort of the same point in the table of sort of open audit actions and assurance, it doesn't tell us, you know, whether them are sort of overdue or outstanding.
Sorry to interrupt, but that's the next item.
No,
that's
sorry.
not the sorry.
I just wanted to ask as well, you talk about actions from last term, and I was just wondering whether do you have any deadline by which people should implement the actions, or is it just left open?
Sorry, I don't know whether, are we moving on to the next item or, yeah, I don't know whether, all right.
Which is what you've just introduced. Are there any questions on that part?
Thank you, Chair. Just a general question, really, and that is, in compiling the annual governance statement, it seems that the object of the exercise is not to assess whether particular processes work, but simply whether they exist. For example, there might be this is random, there might be a process whereby, for example, you go to an external consultation on the business plan, but this doesn't tell us whether any action was taken as a result of that. It merely tells us that that happened. Is that right?
It's explaining the governance arrangements for the council. So it won't go into, it will just say that a report, there is a process in place and there's a report that goes up to members, or there's a report that goes to officers. So the governance statement won't necessarily go into the depth of what was in some of those reports. Only it may say if there was an inspection, it will be pointing out it came out as a good, like an Ofsted good inspection, but it won't necessarily have, it'd make the report quite lengthy to go through every outcome of every inspection, but it would say, I think I've made reference, if there was an internal audit, it came out as a substantial assurance, but it won't have the detail of the actions. Sorry, I don't know if I misunderstood the question.
In my experience as a former director of the London Pensions Fund Authority, the London Civ Limited, at the Equality Human Rights Commission, and the Disability Rights Commission, that governance papers are taken after the internal report. A number of our colleagues are searching for things that are in the internal report. It may be that in future the governance statement is quite down pecking order rather than up there. Thank you.
We should combine or move on then to the internal audit report and then see if there's any. Right. We could. Right. Okay. Thank you for that advice and the experience on that. So in terms of agreeing the recommendation in item 6, which is to endorse the final 2021-22 AGS for inclusion within the council's final statement of accounts. Are we in a position to agree that and then move on to looking at the internal audit report? Okay, thank you. So back to Margaret then, I think, to talk through the internal audit annual report then.
Thank you, Chair. This is the internal audit annual report. It does support the annual government statement, which was the previous report. Each year I come to the committee with the audit plan, which is approved at the beginning of the year. I was just going to explain briefly that the audit plan is partly based on a rolling programme of audits that we do on an annual review or every 3 years. Our key financial audits are every 3 years. We also identify audits required through the risk registers, discussions with senior management, known issues identified through the year, frauds either at Merton or in neighbouring or other organisations, fraud risks or control risks will highlight, or any changes to systems will be considered for inclusion into the audit plan. The audit plan is obviously there's a set number of days that we can cover. So often we will have to focus on those high risks or those audits or those areas we haven't looked at for a while. We have discussions with officers and we talk to assistant directors about their business objectives and their risks in their area. And then we go to the departmental management teams to discuss audits that we have highlighted and for them to have input into any areas that they have concerns about or any projects that are going on that may impact the timing of an audit. So that's just sort of a bit of a background on the audit planning, very briefly, but I know we probably need more detail at some point. So in 21-22, we provided 34 assurance opinions, so 76% to a substantial assurance, which is actually at the same level as the assurance as the previous year. The audits we've undertaken, I've included in page 125 in Appendix B. And I'm just going to briefly explain like the priorities and how. So when we've identified an audit, which it's on the audit plan, we sort of look at the main risks in that area and we set out the objectives that we're going to cover. So such as compliance with legislation, compliance with council procedure, governance arrangements, monitoring arrangements and controls in place such as division of duty and things like that. And we prepare what we call an audit brief. So we sit and go through that with the client. So for each of those areas that we've identified that we're going to look at, we have an objective and we do a rating, whether they're a limited rating for each of those objectives. And from that, we also make some recommendations, which we call actions, and they're all given a priority rating. So priority rating 1 would normally result in a limited assurance audit outcome. And a priority rating 1 would normally be where there's non-compliance of legislation or council policy, such as council contract standing orders, or there's a weakness that's put the good council at risk of fraud or control weaknesses. For instance, if we found one person was able to do a whole process, such as setting up a creditor, an order and paying that creditor without anyone else involved in the process, it would be it would trigger into a priority 1. A priority 2 would be a substantial assurance audit, but it would be recommending actions to enhance the controls that are already in place. And a priority 3 recommendation is more advisory. So we may say, your policy is good, but you could add in this to enhance it. So it's just an advisory recommendation. I just thought it might be helpful to explain that, but hopefully I've explained that clearly enough. The the reports this year, so there's 8 limited assurance reports, which I've detailed in table 2 of the report, which is on page 115. It does list 2 other reports that had priority 1 action, but they didn't tip into a limited assurance because of the it was more the timing priority of getting those done rather than the pushing it into a limited. We currently have 19 outstanding priority 1 actions relating to 6 different audit areas. This is sort of higher than we'd normally like. At the end of the year, we do kind of do a push on audit actions to try and get them closed off before the year ends for the annual report. Some of the areas we've had, there's been quite a turnover of staff, and there's been some issues in getting some of the actions implemented. It's something we follow up, and we do speak to the departmental management teams on a regular basis. I mean, it has improved once we have escalated our contact with these areas, and we have seen some improvements. So it has reduced. And I think we have been now given some target dates for completion of the final outstanding actions. I've just given a summary in the report. So these reports of all the limited assurance reports would have gone up through the year. But on the annual report, I just pulled them all back in again as a overall picture of the year of the work that we've undertaken. So you'll find that next year, as I come up, I'll be coming up with progress reports to this committee as on the limited, and so it's not all reported at the year end, but I then pull it in and give you an update. So these ones I've given you an update on all those reviews that now the actions are now completed, and an update on where they are with their work. The annual report also just gives you an update on the fraud work. So we have a 5-borough fraud partnership. On page 120, I've just given you an update of the work that they've done, and on table 4 breaks down the types of fraud work they do. So they do quite a lot on the tenancy investigative fraud. You will notice the housing application rejects is quite a high figure. And that's actually come in because of we do like a national fraud initiative data matching. So it's actually come back with a high number, I think, because the data on Merton's system includes a lot of old data that needs cleansing. So it kind of looks high, but they were cleared off and just removed from the system. I think that's the main points I wanted to highlight. If anyone's got any questions.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's always dangerous when you network across London, and I was, as the chair of the committee, I was involved, I was invited to a chair of audit chairs forum yesterday, and chatting to other audit chairs, and I'm just wondering how there could be some input from members into deciding the areas for as part of the plan, and maybe that could be something we could tie in with our training. In terms of looking at what's the list, maybe looking at some examples of what's been conducted in those areas, and then having a discussion about raising items that could be in there. Not saying that just because it's requested by a member that it should be on there, but it's just about talking about that and deciding whether it could be considered against the priority list that you've identified. And I think that would be quite useful. I think that members generally, I'm seeing some nodding heads, and I think that will be quite useful. And we are new to it, so we'll come with ideas and our networks as well in terms of what they could be. So, yes.
Just to let you know, that's part of the process of why we bring the internal audit plan to you in March. So to have the discussion, to highlight the areas we're looking at, and then to see if there are other areas you want to look at, because there's normally some allocated time which can then allow for that. But certainly that's something that we, part of the new membership here, may not be aware of, but that's part of the intention of bringing you that internal audit plan.
I have a question in terms of how can we also look at the partners we work with and or those that had an impact on the borough and the risk, how they manage risk as well. But as part of that audit plan, but I think that's a good time to have a discussion, maybe before March if we could. I'd prefer to bring it forward because that's well into the year and we'll only have one more meeting after that of this municipal year. So we can consider that. As I say, that I'm generally getting nods, so I think that's agreed. Are there any other questions or points to raise about the audit?
Mention on the prosecution in court action. There is a backlog of about 3 to 4 years in terms of the criminal and magistrates court because of COVID, and people are taking 3 to 4 years for their cases to come to court. And the Justice's Secretary, Dominic Raab, has made a comment in the House of Commons recently about the delay in court action, and I think this is going to last for a little longer than we expect. But how long it will take, I don't know. But in terms of the criminal appeals court, it's even worse because some of the judges had COVID and they couldn't sit for about 18 months to 2 years. So appeals were very difficult to be had as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your report. I just wanted to ask a question on page 113. The few points actually. Can you hear me? Sorry. Just a few points. So at the top of the page, table 1, I just wanted to find out why the key financials are not being done. Is it because I can see there's no opinion in the boxes? So I'm assuming that they were not, some of them were not done in 2021 and 21-22. So I was just wondering why. And then further down on the page, you talk about duplicate payments, and I was just wondering as well, what are you doing to make sure, well, firstly, whether there were any actions for that and whether those actions have been implemented so that there wouldn't be a reoccurring of what happened for the duplicate payment to occur in the first place. Also, I was concerned when I saw the 2-year outstanding bills by the CCG, and I'm wondering if you could just explain a little bit more on that. Yes, I'll stop there for the minute. Thank you.
Thank you. The key financial systems, I actually aim to do them over a 3-year rolling program, but you will note, so payroll we do every year, and pension admin is actually done through Wandsworth. There's a shared pension service, so I do get that done annually. We try to do, we'll do the key financials if we're aware of any changes or if there's anything that, so I think there was a new, on the cash and bank, there was a new system that came in that we looked at. I can't think of the name of it for a minute, but we went back in to look at that again. And the accounts payable, we were looking at some of the bank mandate changes. So sometimes we will go in if we're aware there's a key risk. We don't actually have the resource to go and do these audits every year. So that's how I manage that. And sometimes what we'll do is we do part of the review some years to get some assurance, but yeah, that's the answer to that question. On the duplicate payments, we do regular monthly duplicate payment checks in audit, so that it's like a rolling thing to pick up any errors. So my understanding was these were, one was a large amount, and I think it was something due from the pension service for Wandsworth. So I think it may have been picked up eventually anyway. I think there was a duplicate payment made, and it's now been credited back, and the other amount is was in the process of being credited. We do try and look at the reasons for these things and whether there's any training required or any lessons. But I think for these, there was only identified there'd been an error made and we'd picked it up. So I say going on as we keep doing these matches, we will, also we keep an eye if that escalates or if that increases. But on the CCG debt, I think there was an issue with they were waiting for orders to be raised before the invoices were paid. So I think it was just an admin thing where it got a bit stuck. So my understanding is now they've found a way forward on that. So it just built up for 2 years. Obviously, we raised it up because we were auditing that area, but that was the explanation we received on that.
Chair, just quickly. No, for me, I think it's just a bit concerning because, so like, for example, the accounts payable and accounts receivable are not being done every year. But then we can see we have double payment and we also have outstanding bill, which corresponds with that as well. And if we don't know the reason why, we have these double payment, then there will always be, chances are there's an increased risk that it will be reoccurring. So I just wanted to make that point. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry for jumping the gun a bit before. I wanted to ask a couple of questions about table 2 on page 115. And one was the number of priority 1 recommendations. Are the numbers in Merton sort of comparable to the numbers in the other sort of boroughs that you cover? And then for the open actions outstanding, are any of these sort of overdue? And do they all have sort of plans in place for the closure? And do you sign off on the closure of them as well, and sort of by doing a recheck or some sort of test to make sure that they're closed to your satisfaction? Thank you.
The actions are higher. The number of priority 1 actions are higher than the partner councils at the moment. But that changes, so that currently when we put our latest figures in, they were higher. The overdue ones, so what we once it hits the dates, they provide a date for implementations. When it hits that, we contact them to get information and to look to retest, and they'll come back and say, can we move the date? So I think that has been happening with some of these older ones. They've asked to move the date. For instance, on building control, I think they had a few officers leave, so they were coming back saying we need longer. We've now pinned them down to another date. So I've been given September for some of these implementations, or October. So again, we need to contact them, but we won't accept just that they've implemented it. We go back and retest that area. So that's, yeah, I do try and report them up to this committee, but as I say, we are starting to get some of these closed off. So I think I was at the last committee, I was quite concerned about the number, but they have gone down. So we have managed to close some of these off. So that's sort of encouraging, but so hopefully it can get cleared in September, October.
So essentially, this committee is the escalation for the unclosed actions.
It would be called if this committee deemed that was appropriate to come and explain the progress on that action.
It'll be useful to have as part of any some case studies where we look at 1 or 2 that have gone through that perhaps will resolve quickly, others where there were hold-ups, and just 1 or 2. just as case studies for us to look at. Very good. Thank you for that. Are there any other points on the? Oh, sorry, yes.
Sorry, just quickly. I'm looking at page 110, and this is where you give your opinion. And I was just wondering if you can envisage a situation, because one of your bullet points there is about follow-up action. But if you are not satisfied with the level of follow-up action, would you be prepared to qualify your opinion?
Yes, I would. Yes, I would be prepared. I've signed this year off because I thought there was some improvement, but if it carried on to next year, I would definitely take that into consideration.
Obviously, you've got some concerns about that. And if it didn't improve, you would want to qualify your statement next time. The other one is just a simple one. Page 122, that table at the bottom has got some big numbers, but I don't really understand what it's about. Can you just explain that?
So we take part in the National Fraud Initiative, which is a data matching exercise with other councils. So this is a match between council tax and electoral registration. So the large numbers are all the matches. So we submit all our data, and every council does, and then they come back with a report of all matches with other councils or other name matches. But they do have to be checked for whether they're actual matches. It could be someone's got a similar name, or there might be a reason for it. So it's given the total referrals for each of the years, and then obviously those that closed and in progress. So there's 327, I think it's the total there at the bottom, is come out as a fraud or an error. So fraud or an error, and there's still further to review. So if there is a match, then that will be followed up to find out why, and if they've committed any fraud, or that there's a reason for it.
Just on the school audits, are they done on a cyclical kind of basis? And if they fall into the priority one, would that cause you to go back again and do another full audit?
We do. We try to do about 6 school audits a year, sometimes more. We're trying to do a few more this year. We used to go back when it was a limited and do a full audit. Obviously, to manage our resource better, we now just go and check those areas that were an issue. So we sort of get evidence for that. I think some of the schools haven't been audited for a while, so we're trying to catch up on the older ones at the moment. And also we didn't go out in 2020, so we had a gap of a year when we didn't go out to visit schools. So yes, we've I think that's what we're trying to manage it that way, and not go out to do a full audit again.
Given that we've got 54 schools, do we do the academies as well? No, so there's less than 54, but on a cycle you'd want to get through them over what period of time?
I suppose we're trying to do it over 5 years. But yeah, I mean, it's big. I think at one point, because we had some that had issues that we did have to revisit, and it slowed it up. I think some are now getting a bit older than 8 years, perhaps plus. So we're trying to pick up those older ones and put a bit more resource this year into that. But yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, you have this, sticking with the school audits, actually, you have common findings, and they all seem to be budget related. And so I was just wondering whether that, and I know you said here that you do a handbook, a newsletter. I was just wondering whether there's any way that some of these common findings could be fed through training. So I know you have governors training, and governors ultimately have responsibility for the schools and the budget. But then also, I'm sure school business managers have trainings as well. And I was wondering whether maybe internal audit could have a slot in the training that they have to possibly share some of these common findings and maybe get them to ask questions, because it is quite concerning to see how everything on there is somehow budget related, because if you're not preparing purchase order, you are not making a commitment into the budget, and therefore the budget figure may not be right. And also, so I was just wondering whether that could be considered, basically.
Sharing issues that are raised so that other schools can be aware of them. I was about to move on, Councillor Fraser, but you haven't asked anything yet, so please do.
I've just been listening to what was said about 2020. So we all blame COVID for lots of things, but in fact, we've spent a lot of time online. And so therefore, some discussion could have been had online. So we don't just fall back and leave it. And I'm looking at DBS in particular here, and it looks as if there was some slippage in that. Nobody bothered to check them on page 116. And so you didn't know whether they were to be renewed or not renewed. And that creates a safeguarding issue. So I'm just wondering how we plan to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Thank you.
It does say that all actions have been completed though by 28th of May, 2021.
Sorry, on the DBS, all actions have now been completed. At the time of the audit, the issue was the renewals, every 3 years are meant to get checked, and there was a delay on those. The services provided by Kingston, so now they've getting regular updates from them and progress. So they sort of that area has improved now.
Just one point. I just wanted to find out whether schools and maybe even the local authority, whether internal audit checking for our 35 status of contractors and public liability insurance. It's only because it just crossed my mind that I know that so HMRC have fined, I think, the Department of Works and Pensions some £87 million for not checking the contractors' IR35 status. And I was just wondering where we are as a local authority, and also whether schools are being asked to check, because it could cost a lot of money.
It is on the audit program to check these IR35 status. So when we go through, we'll look for payments to individuals, and we will ask for evidence that they've done that check. So it is part of our audit testing at schools.
Right. Okay, thank you. I'd like to move us on at that point, if that's fine. So thank you for that. There's nothing to agree on that. It's a noting. Right. Right. Okay. And so the amendments to the Constitution.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As Caroline indicated in her introduction, one of the joys of this committee is that we have responsibility for overseeing the council's constitution. We did a very thorough cross-party review last year, pretty much overhauled all aspects of the Constitution, which was approved by full council in July. But it's a living document, I'm afraid, so we will keep coming back for more bites of the cherry. So this report recommends that you recommend, if you approve it, some more changes to full council at its next meeting. I'll just take you briefly through the recommendations. The first recommendation relates to an anomaly that we found in the access to information rules. So in order to be entirely transparent, decision making normally requires a report to be on the forward plan for 28 days. And there are exceptions to that, which allow us to put a proposed decision on the report in a shorter timescale. But if we can't give 5 clear working days of that decision, we currently need the consent of the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny to have that decision taken within that shorter time period. The way the Constitution has been drafted is we need that consent even if we can give more than 5 clear days working, if the report is what's called exempt, it's not going to be publicly available, although it would be available obviously to members, and that's not a legal requirement. So the first recommendation is that we change that, and that we only need to get the consent of the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny if we can't give 5 clear days notice, whether or not the report is an open one or an exempt one. So that's the first recommendation. The second recommendation relates to motions concerning community forums or fora, depending whether you're in Greek or Latin. At the moment, the time frame for moving motions, such as the one that Councillor Kohler did at the last council meeting, if they relate to community fora, is that they have to be with Democratic Services by 9 o'clock on the day before the meeting. That doesn't give very long for any other councillors to move amendments to that proposed motion. So we're recommending that time scale be made longer, and that the motion has to be in on the morning 2 clear working days before the council meeting, and that brings it into line with all other motions. The third recommendation relates to remote attendance. So some members who perhaps haven't been on the council for so long might not be aware that when COVID hit 2 years ago now, the government changed the rules to allow participation in council meetings remotely. Those rules were changed back, so now it's only legally possible to attend remotely, to attend in person, but we've kept the practice of allowing those councillors who aren't able to come for various reasons to at least beam in and be able to ask questions. An issue arose at the most recent council meeting about whether being able to participate in a council meeting included moving or seconding motions, and we've taken the view that although the Constitution is currently silent on that aspect, it would be good practice for anyone who's formally taking part in the debate by way of moving or seconding a motion to be physically in the room, so that they're effectively legally here for the purposes of that debate. Recommendation D is really just to note that although in the past it's been practiced to put up on Modern Gov, which is your app on your laptops, all exempt papers and for all councillors to access, again, that's not a legal requirement. It's not good information governance to have those papers circulated widely to people who may not necessarily be entitled to them or indeed interested in them. So we are again noting that we will revert to the statutory position, which is that councillors on the body concerned are entitled to those papers. Councillors who will be scrutinising those papers are entitled to them, and any other member who can show they have a need to know because of their role or because, for instance, it's a matter relating to something in their ward, who can show they have a need to know will get those papers, but otherwise they won't be more widely made available. Recommendation E is just there to test you because it's a duplication of recommendation A, so we could perhaps strike that. We had some conversations with our planning colleagues about the planning protocol, and some members will be aware that we're introducing some changes to the way in which those meetings run, but we haven't been able to bottom those out. So we'll do some further work with the Planning Application Committee over the summer and bring those planning changes back to a future meeting. And finally, there's a question in relation to the council's standing orders, contract standing orders, which relates to the financial level at which directors as opposed to members can approve contracts. The scheme of delegation to directors says it's £2 million, but the contract standing order says it's 500,000. Clearly we need to be clear. The chair's pointed out we haven't made a recommendation in that respect, but since we wrote this report, the Director of Corporate Services, the Chief Executive, and I have discussed the matter and are recommending that the limit at which directors can award contracts remain at 500,000, and that any contracts between 500,000 and 2 million be agreed by the Chief Executive in conjunction with the Director of Corporate Services, and that as is currently the position, any contract worth £2 million or more has to be agreed by the Cabinet. So that's a quick canter through. Happy to answer any questions. If you approve these recommendations, they go on to full council for approval by the entire elected membership.
Sorry, just an idea as these go to full council, where we'll all be there. If we just allow them to go there rather than continually debate. A full explanation has been given of them. So can we agree this paper? It does go to full council. They can be debated there as well. Thank you.
I tend to agree with that. But yes, that's a great point.
Sorry. Just on the first point, point 1, point 2 on the planning protocol, it actually says in the statements here that any changes would then be considered by full council. It doesn't say that they will come back to standards and general purposes, which presumably it should do before going to full council.
Yes, I mean, I think it is arguable. It certainly needs to go to Planning Applications Committee because they're the committee that own the process. If there's time to bring it back here, and if members were interested in it coming back here, it could come here as well. But the plan we were proposing would be, apologies if I misspoke in my introduction, to go to Planning Applications Committee and jump from there to full council, but to be considered as part of this overall. This one paper covering both aspects. Again, as Councillor Alan British said, to be debated by full council, having been through Planning Applications Committee.
Do we agree that these go forward to full council?
No, I don't agree.
Yeah. Sorry?
Well, first of all, I find that the statement that's just been made is that, as I understand it, the Constitution says that constitutional matters are decided here and then referred to the council for ratification. We seem to be short-circuiting that process.
So they come here, they can go directly from the head of paid service. But the proposal is that the issues are flagged up here and are dealt with in more detail by the members of the Planning Application Committee, as they're the ones that will be implementing any proposed changes. If this committee wanted it to come back here first, it could. I think the timing would mean that would delay those changes. Whereas if it went straight from Planning Applications Committee to Council, it could go to an earlier meeting.
But sorry, just as a point of clarification, is it not the correct process that things should come here? That's what the Constitution requires. Is that not the case?
That's my understanding, that reports from the changes can be made to the Council's procedures either directly from a report from the head of paid service or myself, or on a report from the Standards and General Purposes Committee.
This one, that we delegate that to the planning committee as it's as a cross-party committee that can discuss it.
That's correct. But if this committee wished it to come back here, it could.
Right. Okay. I'll put that out then. Okay.
So just a general point. I mean, this is a smaller committee. So if there's any of these amendments that we don't agree with, surely we should, take that discussion here rather than, have 57 people discuss it. If this smaller group reaches agreement, and then that result, if there's any of these we don't agree with and we don't wish to go to council, we can deal with it in a smaller forum rather than take up 57 people's time. It's the bigger forum, for everything when we have subcommittees to deal with things.
I take that point, but I would anticipate that there wouldn't be much debate at council anyway, because these have been considered and worked on to come here. It's for us to say whether we feel any shouldn't go forward. But I'm in the hands of the committee. If it's been suggested that these go forward, it's been some discussion that we should discuss them. Are there any points or any questions on any of these that you would wish to raise?
That's exactly the point I've made. These have come to the Standards Committee. I think it is wrong to minimize the importance of the full council. The full council is the decision-making body of this authority, including all 57 councillors. That is the highest you can go. So I would imagine that what we need to do today is allow the process to take root. This goes to full council and planning committee, where that issue is, we need to defer to them as well. Let's not get possessive about things coming back to this committee. The full council is the decision-making body of this authority, and we should respect that. If we can move on, that would be great.
Could I comment on that?
Yes.
With all due respect to the previous speaker, I don't think it's appropriate, and I agree with my friend here, I don't think it's appropriate for fairly detailed matters to be discussed by large groups of people. They won't get discussed, they will just get guillotined. And to be honest, I think there are things that one can object to in all of these items. And the suggestion that we don't discuss it here at all, we just pass it on to the full council, doesn't seem appropriate to me.
Can we put it to a vote to see whether we want to? Because I just, for me, I mean, I've got no problem with it coming back, but it's just that I think it has been clarified. We've been here before. It's going to go to planning, possibly be discussed there, and to full council ultimately. I suggest that we let it go to full council, but rather than talking about it like this, should we put it to a vote maybe?
Well,
see whether
I'd like to on well, this we could separate out whether all of the items bar the planning one should go forward to full council from here, and then the other point is whether the planning item should go through planning and then come back here before going to full council. That seems to be the split in the distinction here. It's been proposed and seconded that we put them forward to the full council, next full council, and I'm taking out the planning one at the moment because we consider whether so that's been proposed and seconded. I'd like to take a vote on that. Yes. So can we say those who are in favour of these items, apart from F and taking out E, which was a duplicate, go forward to full council? Those in favour? Right. 8. Yes. Those against? Okay, 4 against. It will go forward. Dealing with the planning protocol, the people who are going to be in the know more about that will be implementing it, as you said, are the planning committees. So I'm suggesting that it does go to the planning. The question is, do we want it to come back here, having been discussed at planning before, or go straight on to full council from planning?
I'd just like to declare an interest as a member of the planning committee.
Right.
And whether I'm allowed to vote on this item or not, just would be clarification for that. Head of legal.
I didn't hear the second part of that sentence.
So am I allowed to vote on this? Because given obviously it is, yeah, in terms of this motion, if it's going to
because you're on the planning
I'm on
committee.
the planning committee.
No,
yes.
there's no conflict. There's no pecuniary interest stopping you voting on that.
Well, please.
Yes. Right. So that the proposal is that this be dealt. I'm suggesting putting to the committee. This is dealt with by planning and then goes on to council. Is that agreed? Agreed. And if 8-4, right? And those against? Right. So the decision is that the detailed work goes to planning, they discuss it, and goes forward to full council from there. And there will be an opportunity at full council for anyone to raise these points. Okay. Right. I think the idea, there are often changes, as we've heard, and for example, the one about whether people could attend council meetings remotely and the like, whether they could speak at them. These sort of things come up regularly, and I don't think we should make heavy weather of them at this committee unless there was a real sort of deep concern about it. And I don't wish to dismiss any concerns, but the opportunity is not lost. It can come up at council. Okay. Thank you for that. Item 9, we're moving on to. We have a recommendation that we consider how councillors use council resources. Is there any need of an introduction? Do you want to wish to say anything on this?
Just very briefly, Chair. So this is issue has arisen in relation to the practice that's grown up across all groups of writing letters on council-headed paper to their constituents. I think it's an opportune moment to review whether and to the extent to which we might want to change that practice or whether we're happy with it. As you would note, there are a whole number of options for continuing, which start at not allowing it at all to allowing the current situation with various permutations in between, and probably could have thought of at least 5 more options. Given the complexity of debating those options and no doubt lots of differing views, you might consider it would be appropriate to set up a working group cross-party to look at them in a bit more detail and have a bit more of a discursive consideration of those options before coming back to a future meeting with some recommendations. Alternatively, you could pick an option now, but that's a matter for the committee.
Thank you. Councillor Wilk.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I just obviously don't believe that anything would be served by having a working group. I'm obviously surprised that obviously mass mailings of welcome letters by post happens within the council, because obviously I wasn't made aware of this as a member of the council. And I would like to formally move that option 2 is adopted by the council, which political groups can continue sending welcome letters to residents of Merton letterhead, so long as they comply with the template agreed with the monitoring officer. Letters on ward business must be cleared by the monitoring office, and the council will not pay for postage, and letters must be hand delivered. There's many council letters I've sent out over the years in my ward, but I've actually got delivered by hand, and I think we shouldn't be using the post for these purposes. So I'd like to formally move option 2, Chair.
Seconded.
I know we had a pre-discussion that we, Councillor Oliver, I want to raise that.
I just want to say that option 2 would be acceptable as long as the welcome letters could be posted. And the reason for that is that welcome letters are not where you deliver something to every house consecutively in a street, which is easy to do. And we're quite happy to do that for planning, parking, any of those issues. Welcome letters are here, 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 here. It's much more appropriate to post those.
Well, that's not quite option 2 then. So it's been proposed option 2.
I think that's option 1 actually.
Yes. But
it's the status quo effectively.
Right. What I thought you might be raising was a discussion that we'd had about what does the council tell new residents when they move in terms of what goes out with your first council tax bill, telling you where what your refuse collection days are, where perhaps your nearest libraries are, how you contact your councillors, and at that could include these are your councillors and these are their email addresses. So that's a pack. Maybe that pack could be reviewed in terms of what goes out when people move in, and there could be other suggestions made to once that draft is ready. Or once it's circulated to all of us so that we know what goes out, we can feed comments into that. But we've heard a suggestion that we go with option 2. It's been proposed and seconded. You're suggesting a slight amendment to that, which I'm not sensing some great enthusiasm for that amendment. But how do we proceed from here? Does anyone else want to comment on that? I think it's Councillor Hayes.
A point of clarity, I think it's entirely appropriate. I don't know how to work this, Chair. That new residents, new builds, or whatever should be given a full gamut, if that's the right word, of what it is about where they live. So obviously refuse collection days, etc., etc. But these are your councillors, and that should be kind of, I know there's no such thing really, it's apolitical, but it should be slightly apolitical. In a resource sense, these are the people. So I wonder if that could be looked at under some process. So, you know, welcome to Graveney, blah, 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 or welcome to Cannon Hill, blah, blah, blah.
Maybe I wasn't entirely clear, but that's the sort of thing I was suggesting, that we ask that to be looked at so that can be prepared from the council's point of view, and then just gives a completely apolitical, these are your councillors, this is how you contact them. It would say the party, but this is how you contact them. But this, I mean, the sort of things that are often printed that we're talking about here, if you're having a ward meeting with the police for your community, then you would draft a letter. We do have more split wards now, so we need to consider about how that's done. But nevertheless, that will be a letter that we run past the legal team. Would not be promoting any political aspect, no links to political parties, and therefore no gathering of emails, because that will be inappropriate. It's on the council printing, and then that's delivered out by you work it out in your ward. I say that's more interesting with more split wards than we had before, but nevertheless, that's seems to be an appropriate way forward. Given the hour, and I know that Councillor McCabe is going to get onto me because he used to chair this meeting, and he said, if it takes more than an hour, you've allowed too much discussion, Mike. But so I would like to put that to the vote now in terms of option 2. Can we? Option 2 is that I can read it out, but it's on page 138. I don't think we need to have a resolution on that. I think we're asking the officers to work on the welcome. First of all, I think it would be useful for us to know as a committee what is sent out to someone who moves into the borough now, and then if we want to bring that back, we could discuss that in future. But it's really about giving advice or saying, well, can this be included? Can that be included? So I think it would be just useful for us to know as members of this committee what currently goes out.
It might, if it's helpful, it may not be. I think we could go and check what's currently said out. These are your ward councillors, and I think we can probably explore including in whatever welcome information people get that very bold statement. These are your councillors. Anything else more sort of highfalutin, we might need to have a think about. But I think it's fine for the council to recommend that we go in and look at that, and subject to asking Carolyn might be about that.
Right. Okay. And we can add that to the recommendation. Yes. Yes.
So I'm not sure we do actually physically send anything out. There's clearly something on our website about if you're moving house, how you find out about your new neighbourhood, and also who your councillors are. So you put your postcode in and that will bring up your councillors. We had been looking as part of our customer contact programme, as part of our CRM, when you sort of signed up for a new account, that would then signpost you to some of the information you were referring to, where your local GP was, where your library was, bin collection days and things like that. But I'm not sure we physically send anything out, and therefore there could be an additional cost associated with actually doing that. And then especially if we have quite a lot of churn within the borough as well. So every time someone moves within the borough, then we would need to send a new pack out as well.
Could we therefore, I'm conscious the two of you wanted to say something, but I'm trying to move us on collaboratively. Yeah, right. Well, but all I was going to suggest was that that would fall within the deputy leader and civic pride and civic engagement, I think, as a brief, that we could make a recommendation that we ask the deputy leader or the cabinet member to consider the way that we communicate with new residents and people who move into the borough. And that should include a welcome, something informing people about their local councillors, whether that be using online or printed matter. For many, it will be printed, I think, but it's whatever is appropriate. Does that deal with the point you want to raise? Okay.
Here since 2010, and we never used to use personal details. And recently, we now have a personal phone number, a personal email, and I don't agree with it. And there have been problems where people have been harassed because of that, and it was meant to be taken off and use the council's detail. So we need to have a look at this.
Yeah, I was only suggesting the council email address. Sorry.
They haven't taken it all off.
Yes.
No, not mine though. Mine is still there.
Okay, well, that can be taken outside the meeting, but I was only suggesting council email addresses.
Yes.
mike.brunt@merton.gov.uk for everyone. No, for your own one, but councillor.
Yeah, I think we should look at it. Maybe it's my age, but I'm both against the idea go on the internet. I don't know how many people go on the phone these days, but normally when you go on anything, it tells you the very bit. I must be the luckiest man in Britain in terms of using any phones. And then they say, oh, but you might want to use our website, right? I think it's going to be looked at. I'm not making a decision, but I think there's something nice about a local, somebody moving into an area and being told, welcome, to tell us, go and look at the website. I mean, I can get that from 9 million organisations now.
I will. Yes.
So we're going to look at it in any event. So
well, I think that we don't have a budget on this committee. That's clear. But all we can ask is respectfully ask the relevant cabinet member to look into ways of carrying out what we've asked. So that, but what's before us here now in terms of the rules, and we're saying option 2 is what we're agreeing on, and we're asking for other ways to be considered. I don't buy in totally, and it may be controversial, but my mum, who's 93 going on 94, tells me more about what she finds on the internet than many of my other friends, and I get forwarded on Max from the Telegraph every morning. So she's on there reading everything. So it's not an age thing. It's about a willingness and also access. I do agree with that. So is that agreed then? Option 2. Agreed. Yes. Right. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
I've got a clarifying question. Under option 2, we'd no longer be able to send out letters on sort of ward business posted. And is that the intention? So if there's a police meeting we want to make residents aware of, that would no longer be possible. It's not.
You can't send any letters posted.
So the letters can go, but they can't. The council won't fund the cost of postage.
Move to a vote, Chair.
Yes.
It's not on my version, but there have been, as of the date of this agenda, no complaints against members. I think what we have discussed is bringing a fuller report to a subsequent meeting, setting out some information around trends, so not naming individual councillors, but updating the committee on the kind of complaints that come across my desk and what's happened to them over the last a year to 2 years, or even indeed over the last term, perhaps.
This is where, although I haven't neglected the independent members, that they would have indicated they wanted to speak, wouldn't they? You'd have seen. Yeah. Right, okay. But that's where the independent members have a role to play as well in handling any complaints and deciding whether they actually are complaints as well, I think, aren't they? Or whether they're managed in other ways. So
the Constitution allows me to consult the independent members when I do the first assessment of a complaint. If it does go fully through to an investigation, then before any committee makes a decision on it, they have to mandatorily take account of the independent person's views on it.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And thank you to the independent members for your involvement in that in the past. But I think that that could be something we've flagged in terms of looking at how we identify items for risk assessment. I think that we could have also therefore something in our training session on what is a complaint. One or two case studies about ones that went through and ones that fell short because actually they were either vexatious or malicious. But how you come to that decision, I think it will be useful for us to know that and understand that process.
If you, just to clarify that these are complaints against individual named members, is that right? That's the kind of complaint we're talking about.
That's the sort of complaint we're talking of here, yes.
Correct. So it would be an anonymised report, but it's not to understand what's happened about individual complaints, more to understand the nature of the kind of complaints that come in and the general approach that's taken to them, as the chair has described.
But just for the avoidance of doubt, not when someone writes in and says, I don't like the way that this party sends a welcome letter, we're not talking about that. We're talking about individual conduct.
And that's what would be useful to have, the sort of some anonymized examples of what that might be. It could be an officer complaining about the behavior of a member in their company, in their presence. It could be a resident. It could be member on member, as I understand it. So I think we just need one or two examples of what sort of things they could be and how that process is managed. Because even if it doesn't come here, there was an issue and that needs to be managed. And that needs to be resolved, because it may not be a formal complaint. It could have been about the way that the chair of a committee actually managed that committee. There could be a bit of training and advice for that chair of the committee. So I think that many of these things can be resolved not amicably, but appropriately. And then we need to know what would come here. So, well, I'm relieved there's none this time, but can we include that? And I've mentioned earlier on that we'd perhaps look at training that we would want to have. Have we got enough to be going on with, or could we actually leave it maybe to the political groups to come forward within the next week for anything reflecting on tonight's meeting or other things that might come up that we'd want to include in training? Yeah,
So just to clarify that the external auditor is able to provide some training on sort of the accounts, if you would find that welcome as well.
Yes.
And that's included within their fee.
I did, yes, I double checked the fee bit before we started. So that's in the fee. But I think, and also some advice on what are the questions that members should be asking. From those that have financial and risk management experience, but those that don't. So what are the sort of questions that will be good and have been probing in the past that we for us to be using? So I suggest that we set aside an evening for that. I don't think we could do it on the night of a committee. So shall we say that by the end of September, we would want to have some sort of training, if that's feasible?
Sure, that's feasible.
Yes.
But if members have got any ideas outside the meeting about what they'd like to be included,
yes,
please do let me know. We'll make sure we factor them in.
And I think well, by the end of July, if we let you know what training we feel we have, other than those that I've identified so far, and then that list is circulated in August or sometime in early September, and the training is in September at a mutually agreeable time. It will be something that the advantage of training now is that it can be videoed and therefore is still available for those that are not on it, or any substitutes that come along in future, so they're aware of it. Does that work for everyone? That's good. Thank you. The work program is here, and I think that I mentioned earlier that it would be quite good to, if we could bring forward some of the discussion, maybe it could be part of that training as well, about because the work program might be informed by what comes up in the training. So we take it as a provisional work program, but subject to perhaps review. Is that agreed? Okay. Well, that was the first one. Let's see how they go in future. Thank you for your participation, and safe journeys home. Thank you.